Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Bergstrom?
Here.
Mr. Dance?
Here.
Ms. Goodman? Mr. Gentili?
Here.
And agenda, did everybody get a chance to approve the agenda? Or any
With the
comments?
amendment, TSA contract?
Well, it's already under old business,
Okay.
but you have the contract that will be talked about at that time.
So moved.
I second it.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No public comment here today?
Does the paper usually come in now still like they used to, or don't they?
It's hit and miss, yes. We
Hit
had
and miss.
somebody
Or miss
here
the
last meeting, but at the last meeting, there was it the paper? Okay.
They do always receive the packet.
Approval of minutes. Did everybody have a chance to read through the minutes and any corrections to that?
I make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented for the March 18th meeting.
Support.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
And the treasurer's report. Next up, accounts payable.
Thank you.
Does everybody have a copy? Any questions on anything for Barry?
I just might mention, I noticed we got a nice bill for Consumers Energy, but it was for February and March.
Yes, it's 2 months worth.
Right. And I see we have some hydraulic parts, I presume that's for the snow mover?
Yes.
Okay.
How old was that now? Is it over 10 years old? Or how old is that?
13, yeah.
Are we looking at setting money aside to replace that? Because are we gonna keep getting $1,000 hits on fixing that thing?
Well, if you think about buying a new one, I think you're gonna have a $200,000 hit.
It was more than that, probably more like three.
Probably about 300.
Yeah, well, I just use that as a conservative number.
We have two. Our older one is 99, so that's 20 years old. So that's actually the one that's first scheduled to get replaced. It's on our long-term capital improvement plan, but it's probably out there 5 years. It will move up if something, dies. Because we've got two, and generally we only need one. It's only when we get, a 10-inch or more snowfall that we really need both out there to get things cleared.
This is repair on the one we talked about the other day, isn't it?
Yes, this
Is
is
that
the
coming?
newer one, which is the one we generally use.
Do you have that in your?
I'm gonna give an update as to where that stands, yes.
Well, I suppose for that much for a new unit, probably keep putting Band-Aids on the one we got. Makes more sense, I guess.
I mean, this is the first year that we've had significant issues on that piece of equipment. From an FAA standpoint, they are eligible for replacement after 10 years. So every year we get beyond that, we're doing good.
Okay, and then the feds will pick that up?
Yes,
will they?
yes, that's
Okay.
eligible.
Yeah, things are sounding better than
Grand
that.
extent.
Well, that's
Yep.
very good.
Any other questions on the accounts payable?
None for me.
Motion to accept, anybody?
I'll make a motion to accept the March 2019 accounts payable as presented.
Support that?
Roll call?
Mr. Bell?
Yes?
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom?
Yes.
Mr. Dance?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
And we've got the balance of the financials. Anything, Barry, standing out here that you want to comment on?
Not really, I mean, for the month, there's nothing really that's significantly out of whack. The fact that we had 2 months utilities and also the audit expense, those are really kind of what pushed us into the negative for the month. But on the positive side, we did get a state reimbursement check for the snow the parking lot snow pusher that we had a grant for. So there was some offsetting revenue as well.
Well, there's a couple of very positive things, I guess, is that miscellaneous is, you haven't tapped into that at all, so that's still 5,000. And the sign lease, 3,600, nothing on that, but at some point in time, I guess,
Yeah, that's May or June is usually when those comes in from Lamar.
I just question here, the landing fees for general aviation were 86%, but the landing fees for public charters are only 50%.
That is actually remaining. So this is through March, so that's halfway through the fiscal year.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah.
50% is,
Yep.
but like for the general aviation, most of that happens in the summer, so that is skewed more, whereas for public charters, we basically build them consistently throughout the year.
All right, makes sense, thank you.
I did just want to point out the insurance check that Barry's going to report that we received, that has been applied to reduce your total year-to-date amount in repairs and maintenance. So that is where that insurance check shows up.
What was that for again?
It's for the lightning strike that we took back in September,
Okay,
so
covered all the costs then, did it?
mine's our deductible, and we're at $1,000 deductible, I believe. I think,
I'm not sure. That sounds, it's around there.
Yeah.
Speaking of insurance, did we ever get the stuff cleared up for that guy that ran into the fence and all that stuff?
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I lost track.
All right, motion to accept the financial statements,
So moved.
I'll second that. That's an all in favor, correct? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Delinquent hangar tenant, the packet that I handed everybody, that, Mary, I think that's that first one here. On the front, the executive committee met and discussed this, per last month's meeting, when he said, why don't you guys talk it up, hash it over, come back with a proposal.
No. Well, I don't know whose dog that is.
Ginger,
Not gonna like it.
It's the, yeah, out there.
Ginger,
Do we have an under
out.
I can hear you.
So last month, we mentioned our delinquent tenant, Mr. Kaiser, and it was suggested that we bring this up with the executive committee, come to an understanding and a proposal to see if we can get this settled. Prior to that meeting, I had had a conversation with him and mentioned to him that if we came to a lesser amount, would he be, if he were to take care of it, and he was agreeable to that conversation. So when we met, based on what we did with the previous tenant that owed us a lot of money, we took a 50% settlement from him to clean it up. So as of March 1st, Mr. Kaiser owed us $10,830. What we discussed at that committee meeting was that if we split that in two, it's $54.15. Send him a letter, a certified letter saying that this, we would eliminate half the debt if he agreed to pay the $54.13 in 60 days. And if he agreed to pay it in 30 days, take it down to $5,000. And then send him a new rental agreement that he would fill out and commit to staying current with, because as it is now, he is not liable because it's his father that's on that lease. Without bringing that up, just ask him to fill out a new one at our current rates. Since this meeting, he did make a $300 payment, and we also billed him another $150. So the numbers have changed a little bit, but we're coming to the board to ask if that sounds like an acceptable procedure going forward, or to have a discussion on it.
I'll vote for that. I'll take $1 if I said no dollar, so. Now, the thing is, he's gonna keep renting though, month after month. So what are we gonna, what kind of sanctions are we gonna have if he misses one or two of payments, and when we do that?
guess we have the same sanctions as if I didn't pay.
Right.
As long as he signs a new document going forward, now he stays current at the current rates, which is $150 a month. He agreed with me on the phone that he owed us the funds, and he was very receptive to negotiating and getting it cleaned up. So I don't know if the 60 days sounds fair, or you want that different, or,
If you can squeeze the blood out of the stone, take what you can get.
I agree, I think it's quite a fair deal.
And especially, as Doug mentioned, the lease is actually in his deceased father's name. So legally, he doesn't have an obligation. So, you know, if it were to be pursued, we don't have a lot to pursue other than reopening that estate.
But you can put a lien on that estate and lock that hangar.
I mean, there are things we
Yeah.
could do, but they wouldn't necessarily be with regards to him, it would be the estate, and so.
But is his property in that hangar as well?
No, it's his father's.
It was his father's, so I don't know how what transpired as a result of the estate.
the aircraft that's in there would be, if you know airplanes and their value, it would be probably less than the settlement. So for us to take it and try to, but George did make a comment that it's gonna be a process to get that. We can do it, we can go down that road, but it's gonna get expensive.
It's
I
not
don't
worth it.
mind taking the money and making a deal, however, I don't wanna go forward with, you know, somebody mentioned, it's like, okay, so this guy's gotta sign a contract with us, and no more late payments, we're done.
Once you get the new contract in hand,
Right.
absolutely.
We don't have a check yet, but he's gonna send a check, or do we have a check?
No, this was the executive committee's recommendation, so if everybody's okay with this, then we'll proceed. And I would imagine we have a letter come from George,
Yeah.
yeah,
Great, yeah, I think it's great.
okay?
Also, do we have a process for how far in arrears can a person get before we start doing something? I mean, $10,000,
We do not currently have a policy.
I would probably want to
And
think of something.
To bring you in a quick snapshot up to speed, the billing procedure coming out of the county offices were
Week.
weak at best for many, many, many years. Rachel took
Rachel's
over
picked
2
that
years
name
ago
for us.
and cleaned everything up.
Good.
From either bills not being sent out or checks not being cashed, it was not really a good situation. It's much better now. So these are two that were way back that had never received invoices. One's been taken care of, and this is the other one that had received since Rachel's been billing, but just acknowledged that
Sure.
it hadn't been paying.
And just maybe moving forward, they'll have a good business plan for what we're gonna do. Thank you, Rachel, for all you've done. There will be another person someday, I am certain, unfortunately.
Well, it's a little complex because the son really doesn't have any liability on this, really. He doesn't, he could walk from it, except that we have the plane then, so, but what are we gonna do with that plane? You know, you can't fly it, right?
No.
It probably has some, I don't know, how much value do you think that has, that plane?
Like I said, I think it'd be less than the settlement,
Like from settlement, yeah.
because it's so old, and it
Yeah.
has to be torn down and redone, so.
And we'll be getting income again now, right? So supposedly.
Yeah, okay, so I'll get with George and update these numbers, and then, do we need a motion for that?
I would assume, I'll make that motion.
So the new numbers then would be 5340. As of today, if we were to cut his bill in half, which is now 10,680, it's 5340 at 60 days. And if we did still offer that if you paid it in 30 days, we take it to $5,000.
Right.
And the
a pretty sweet
contingency
deal.
of signing a new contract.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll support that.
Okay, was that a motion?
Yeah, I make a
Okay,
motion.
and
for that.
support? You okay? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
That's really nice to have that kind of wrapped up. We don't have to check yet, though.
Yeah.
All right, committee reports and discussions, the executive committee. So now there's 3 other documents that I handed each of you. We met with, to discuss the 3 separate contracts that have been out of date for some time that Barry works under. One, his airport director's agreement, one, the fixed base operators agreement, and then the third, the Part 139 agreement. So, again, airport director's agreement is basically Barry's salary to do what we ask him to do to run the airport and report to the authority. The FBO agreement is an agreement that's fixed base operator agreement, and this is all of the things that are done and billed back to the authority at a dollar-based amount. And then the third, the Part 39, is really all the federal regulations that we're under because we have a commercial airline service and the amount that is contracted to reimburse Barry for the expenses incurred in those activities. Do we need to go any further with the review of what
So
those?
these are all to Barry, fixed base operation, these are all the things that Barry
Just
does?
to be clear, one is to me is a contractor or contracting employee for the airport, and the other two are to Orchard Beach Aviation, which is a company that I basically operate.
So all three of these agreements that Barry is currently working under are dated October 1 of 12 through May 31 of 14. So these have been expired since 14, fair to say?
Not all three. I think each one has a different date.
Okay, this one is, commences on the 15th, the October of 15 for 3 years, and then the other one was,
And we're also.
So all three are expired.
they're all three expired.
Right.
So,
And continuing on a month-to-month basis.
yes, so last year, the budget committee approved different rates in all three of these categories. But nothing was done with updating these contracts to reflect those numbers. So what we felt would be the most prudent thing to do would be to get these things in line with what the budget said for this year. So develop redate all three of these contracts with new numbers based on 1 year, going back to the beginning of this budget cycle and coming forward to the end of this budget cycle. So change all three documents dated October 1 of 18 through September 30th of 19. And then before we get to October of this year, get a new set of documents, whether that be a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 3-year plan, whatever the authority would like to do going forward, but let's get caught up with what the budget says now.
So is it retro pay back to?
Yeah, so if you look at, let's start with the Part 139 agreement that I handed you. We're proposing that we change the dates, and if you looked at, Barry's been billing us at, or Orchard Beach has been billing us at $12,200 a month, which was what the previous agreement said, even though the budgeted amount was to be $1340 per month. So it's a difference of $1220 a month, and if you look at how many months Barry's billed us, that's a difference of $7,300. So we're suggesting that we bring that current, and as if he would have been billing us the proper budgeted amount. And then he would begin billing properly. This says March at the bottom, but this month he billed us at, again, the lower rate. So going forward, the balance of this season, he would bill at the proper amount. Okay? So that's Part 139.
So the difference is $1,220.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
times 12 then, that's what you're saying.
No, times, Barry's billed us 6 months at the lower rate, so we'd catch him up and he'd finish,
Then we'd go up to that rate right there.
Okay,
and that would bring us to
This is
what
the
the
catch-up going back to October.
oh, here it is. yeah.
what the authority approved last year as the budgeted amount.
Okay, all right, understand.
So if we go to the FBO agreement next, same thing with the dates. The difference in what was budgeted and what Barry's been billing at under the old contracted amounts is $16.50 an hour versus $18.15, which represents a 10% increase. If we look back at the months, October through this month of March, this is what Barry has billed us, 2,548 hours at a difference of $1.65, so we bring this contract current with a payment of $42.0420. Questions there? And then he would finish the balance of this budget cycle this year, billing a proper different amount. And then the airport director's agreement. He's been billing us at a salary-based $42,000. The authority last year in the budget cycle approved an increase to 45, or budgeted for an increase to 45, but Barry's been billing us at the lower amount. So again, if we caught him back up with what was budgeted, it'd be $1,500 to Barry. Then we're suggesting that these two contracts were budgeted at a 10% increase. This one was not, for whatever reason. Had it been budgeted consistent, we'd have a $1,200 difference. So we're making a recommendation that sometime between now and the end of this budget cycle, we issue Barry a one-time payment of $1,200 to bring the consistency across all three contracts. So Barry, then I met with Barry. He's okay with the FBO agreement. He's okay with Part 139. He's not completely comfortable with the airport director's agreement from the standpoint of optics.
Well, actually, no, I'm not comfortable with any of them because I don't think I should be getting retro pay.
Oh, well then I'll pay it.
So we budgeted, so this is a dilemma in this room, we budgeted for it last year. I wasn't on that budget committee, but we never followed through and got these contracts done to meet those amounts. So we are tasked with getting these updated. He's being a nice guy saying he doesn't want the change, but this is what we're recommending.
How many years has it been static?
It varies by agreement, but some going back as much as 6 years. Others have been more recently adjusted. I gave the executive committee kind of a rundown over the last decade of kind of inflation rates and where things have been adjusted over time.
Yeah, he gave us some really good detailed information to go back.
If there was a discussion in the budgeting process that identified an increase due to the increase, like his wages and to the company, and you're obligated to that, I would say. Did we write the contract at that time? No. But we did the budgeting process with that in mind. Correct? Is that what you're saying?
I believe, I wasn't on that committee. Brooks led that
It was in
committee.
the budget that was approved.
Right.
From my perspective, those were placeholder numbers to make sure that there was funds budgeted,
Right.
even though the negotiation was going to happen later and the resulting contracts could be different. So,
The only, I guess I would fall back on, we dropped the ball a little bit in completing that circle. The thing I would ask is that, I don't know your company and stuff, but also too, we don't wanna get you in any kind of tax. Do you wanna make other, like your 1,200 into a 401 or a Roth or something instead of taking, okay. Yeah, I think we have an obligation if we,
I agree with your point in the fact that we as a board dropped the ball on getting the contract done, so he shouldn't be penalized. I guess where I feel kind of dumb is, I guess, sitting here last year, I never understood that Orchard Beach was you. So I guess from a board perspective, what do we have in place so that somebody doesn't say that there's separation here? Like, is there an RFP, is there a sole source form, are you the only company that provides that service? And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, but somebody from the outside might say that. So what protects us
Sure.
that there's some sort of sole source or that there was an RFP and you're the only bidder?
Historically, that's what has been here for decades.
Mhm.
The manager also ran the airport concierge service. I don't know what you wanna call it.
Right. That's it is a common model in small airports. However, from a process standpoint, that's why I've always been, since I've been in this position, very clear that I don't want anything to do with finances. That's why we have had the county and other parties historically doing that, because there are inherent potential conflicts of interest in that dual role, so.
Well, what there should be is a flag somewhere in the process to where, when the contract is up, a couple months before, 2-3 months before, you can start having that dialogue as opposed to playing backwards like we're doing today.
That's what, and that's, we're saying this is just to get caught up to where it should have been. And then we start discussions in a month or 2 months to get to, we're ready with new documents to roll out for changes going forward. Whether that be a 2-year agreement on each of these with some kind of a percentage increase, based on some other numbers that the county employees receive, or however we wanna look at that.
Do we have the additional funds in the budget, or at least in cash availability?
They are in the budget.
Yeah, you already budgeted for these
Yeah.
things.
Right.
40,000?
Well, the Barry's deal plus the deal for the contract services maintenance. As Doug is saying, it was put into the budget and so on, but it was never carried through to Barry's end.
The steps, Barry, that you've taken to kind of alleviate that conflict of interest, is that documented anywhere?
Yeah, I would say no. It's really historical knowledge of the board and kind of how things have been operating. There is no policy that I'm aware of.
What would you like, Mr. Chairman?
I think there's logic behind this. We met and went over it. We had a very good discussion with it. I then met with Barry. It was a backwards negotiation. And I respect his not wanting this to look poorly, but I agree. I think step one was we budgeted, and step two is we failed to get it done right away. That shouldn't be his issue. His costs are going up. I mean, the FBO and the Part 139, you can see in our financials every month, he's billing us, it's a pass-through. But his costs are going up from his employees, and he's billing at old rates. I don't think that's appropriate. So I would make a recommendation that we honor all three of these agreements, make these changes. The contracts, if you want to see them, I met with George Saylor this morning. When Barry and I met, George was out of town for 2 weeks on vacation. He's back. I met with him this morning, so he has these changes, these dollar value changes, and he's going to edit those into the contracts. I'll have those later this week. So I would propose that we make the changes, but if you want to see it in the physical contract form, which he said historically, this authority has not wanted to approve anything unless they've seen the physical contract. That's another month. As long as, if we're in agreement, then I'll get those here to be signed after next month's meeting. But I would like to at least say, Barry, going forward, please bill us at the proper rates.
So moved.
Okay.
Can
Okay.
we just make
Yes.
a slight amendment to that, just for Barry's protection and my own selfish protection as a member of this board? If we could just document the steps that he's taken to avoid any conflict of interest, so that if anybody ever tried to say there was a conflict, that there was documentation that he doesn't get involved in the financial decisions, that's segregated, and that there's a policy that puts, that I know you're saying that's always been the case, but I would feel more comfortable if there was an actual written document just
Yeah.
saying that's why this is able to happen.
You can fill out a conflict of interest form, which basically notes what the conflict and what your avoidance of that conflict has been. Now, you can just have those without policy to go with them, but you can have something in the record that says
Mhm.
conflict of interest. Outlines it. County
I
has
think
one.
that makes good sense.
So you have that would all come back at next month's board meeting, but you're looking for the approval to have George do the contract.
Correct, with the rates that
With the
are,
rates budgeted,
Correct.
and that Barry would begin billing us,
So
and then we will make it right with him.
Yeah, I just might mention that, all of us on the executive committee there, when we came up with this, we were all completely 100% in agreement, so.
All in favor with that?
That
Motion?
should probably be our roll call.
Yeah.
A roll call?
Mr. Gentili,
yes.
Ms. Goodman,
yes,
Mr. Dance,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hawk,
Yes.
Mr. Bell.
Yes. Thank you for the discussion on that point, everybody. Budget committee did not meet, although Rachel, you sent an email out. I'd like to get that in process soon.
Yes.
Um,
Yep, the county has begun the budget process, so especially if we are looking at requesting at all an increase in what we receive from the county as far as funds, we should start looking at our, budget requests for this coming fiscal year pretty quickly.
Okay, so I'll reach out to the budget committee members later today with some options and get that set up. Same with capital projects committee, we didn't meet. Barry and I did meet in that, we met about the door. So our first set of doors, one of the things that we were concerned about was the heating of the concrete that's underneath the doors, not only in that hangar, but all of the doors. We don't feel the concrete underneath was poured at a proper depth back in the day when they built that building to prevent some heave of the frost, when the frost comes out of the ground, and it did occur. So that first set of doors that we have acquired came with not as much adjustment. We've learned our lesson, but the concrete did heave and make those doors inoperable for a short period of time. I think they're working now. Better, so,
Oh, do they go down again, then, is it grounded,
yeah. Yeah.
So how long
So
is the time?
I'm reaching out to the contractor to get some solutions. Again, we're hoping this is just a big nightmare on this first door, and we've learned all our lessons. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. We've got, along that lines, we've got when that committee meets, we've got to discuss two other buildings. We've got that other hangar that we've never closed it in, the old box hangar that we talked about years ago with the airlines and doing something, and the county went through the process of agreeing to lend us money if we were to redo that. We never went through with it. And then the other small hangar over here to the side, the ancient little T hangar, we have a massive bird problem here, pigeons. And they have openings they go into, and before those two buildings had no doors on them, we didn't have a bird problem based on Barry's daily report.
We haven't had any bird accidents yet, have we, or anything?
No, this is just birds defecating on airplanes. And we did have a
Okay.
recent tenant who complained about it again.
Mhm.
So once we got the T hangar, the main 10-unit T hangar closed in, the bird problem has diminished in there to some degree, not completely. Because as Barry and I went in the other day, they flew over our heads coming out. But these other two have to be addressed. So that committee will talk about some options and look at the budget.
spikes. You get those strip spikes, you put up on the wood, so they can't rest on them. I mean, I don't know if you've seen those before, but some of the places will use those to keep birds from resting in their buildings.
Okay.
Another interim you could use is put a couple of oval decoys in there.
We've tried that.
They get used to it after a
That
while.
works for a couple weeks.
Then you get used to it, huh?
Yeah, we've had a screecher that basically goes through.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
And
and
they
then
still-
again, that works for a couple weeks and then they get used to it.
Okay.
Got some barn cats?
Then there'll be kitty tracks on the
Yeah.
planes.
The issue from my perspective is that we historically did not have an issue, but now that we've got these two buildings that are open, we're raising families now of pigeons, so the population in the immediate area is much higher. And therefore, they're now finding holes that weren't, we're always there, but there wasn't enough bird population to really search them out, and now they're getting into places and causing problems.
So those are the committee reports. I'm going to turn it over to the airport director's report.
Okay, I think everyone's got a copy. So no incidents or accidents in the past month. I've already briefly mentioned the fact that the insurance claim for our lightning strike, that was submitted and we received the check shortly thereafter. There are still a few items that are coming in on the expense side, so we've now got the revenue a little bit ahead of the expenses. So one of the items that was taken out is a lighted windsock at the middle of the field. We've now received all of the components of the replacement of that. And when weather conditions improve, we've got to get our electrician out to install that. So I think probably in the set of bills I just gave Rachel this morning is the last invoice on that. And then the actual invoice to come from the electrician. That quote for all of that was included in the insurance payment, so we've been reimbursed for it already. And then last Monday I did the presentation for our revenue sharing grant request to the revenue sharing board for this year. Page 2, looking at our enplanements for the month. As I predicted and mentioned to the board last month, our expectation going into March was that March was going to be a down month as compared to the year before, because the previous year, due to scheduling challenges, we had a sale for the entire month where every seat was $99. So that gave us a significant uptick over the 2 years ago. We kind of fell back. We're still a little bit down from 2 years ago, but much more in line with where we were 2 years ago than we were a year ago as a result of that sale. On the performance side, the good thing is that after that blip of poor service in February, and if you recall last month I mentioned to you that at the end of, just before our last meeting, myself and Public Charters had a conference call with the operator and basically made them aware that there were issues. Since that time, everything's been working flawlessly, so I think they listened a bit. Weather also plays a role. Some of those challenges were impacted by the weather. Still not necessarily excusable in my opinion, but weather was a factor in that.
Now, the operator you're referring to is the ones that actually provide the plane and fly the plane, right?
Correct. Ultimate Jet Charters is the
The ones that
aircraft
Kalamazoo,
operator.
right?
They're actually based out of, I want to say Cincinnati, but
Okay,
the airplane that we generally use on Sundays comes from Kalamazoo.
okay. I knew there was a Kalamazoo connection
Yeah.
there someplace.
Airfares. So this is where things get a little challenging, interesting, scratch your head. If we look at the average fares out of Manistee as compared to our neighboring airports, there's a couple things this month that will jump out at us. The average fare out of Grand Rapids, roughly $300. The average fare out of Traverse City, roughly $300. It's never been that close in the 10 years that I've been doing this reporting. Historically, Traverse City would be $100 plus more expensive than Grand Rapids. you'll see by the things that are highlighted, Traverse City actually has more destinations where they are the lowest fare versus Grand Rapids. Again, that's never happened before. That puts us kind of in an upside down situation where historically people would gravitate to using our service to save money out of Traverse City. Now we are suddenly slightly more expensive. So our market is much smaller under these circumstances than being able to pull from a wider community. Why this is, I don't know. Airfares fluctuate all the time, fare sales come and go, but if you look at the carriers that have the lowest fares out of Traverse City, it's predominantly American that is pushing these low fares right now for whatever business reason they're trying to accomplish. So that, I'll talk about it a little bit later when we get down to marketing, is something that we're trying to digest and trying to understand better. So,
Barry, if I could, just one question.
yes,
The revenue sharing grant app was for turnout gear?
Yes.
What is turnout gear then?
it's basically the equipment that firefighters wear when they are responding to a fire.
Okay.
So
How much did we ask for? Roughly?
roughly around 7,500. I don't.
7,500?
So 2,500 a set is in the ballpark. I don't have the exact number
That's okay.
for us.
Thank you.
The equipment we have, even though it's never been to a fire, it has a life expectancy of roughly 10 years, and it's now past that,
That's
so it needs to get replaced.
That might be a real good shot.
There's a lot on that revenue sharing board request plate right now, so there typically is, but it's about 2 to 1 versus available dollars this go round, so. So on equipment issues, so this was discussed a little bit earlier, so our main plow truck is back in service. After I reported last month that there were 2 issues that happened pretty much simultaneously, the power steering and transmission issues. It turns out that the power steering is powered off of the transmission. Back in January, the power steering went out and diagnosed it, and because this is large equipment and you just can't drop it off someplace to get it fixed, a lot of this diagnosis happens over the phone. So what we were instructed to back in January was, oh, it sounds like it's your power steering pump, replace that. We did replace that, and it worked for a couple months, and then it went out again. This time of going around, it's like, okay, Oshkosh said we've never had that unit go out that quickly. There must be something else going on. Finally getting to senior person who really understands the equipment inside and out, they were able to walk us through and basically logically piece together what the issue was. And the issue basically was not necessarily the pump, but it was also the pump and what drives the pump. And basically there's a set of interlocking gears. And over time, for whatever design reason, those are not lubed, so they're basically dry gears. So over time those gears wore out. We replaced half of it, but the mating set was still worn out, so therefore it lasted a couple months and then the edges wore off, and then we basically had the same issue.
So you had to replace both gear sets again?
So we had to replace both, but fortunately instead of replacing the equipment, this gentleman basically was also able to find us a place to get this refurbished, since it's actually a simpler thing. So we've had both units refurbished and back in the vehicle last week, and unfortunately we got to use it yesterday. And as a result of that, we now are no longer seeing the issues that were being reported on the transmission side. So we believe that all of this was tied together. So I think we're past that. Of course, now we won't really know until 6, 7 months from now if we really do have everything under control.
Sounds a little like planned obsolescence, doesn't it? It does, just a little bit.
So I was thinking, he's talking about that and so on, how many hours on this vehicle we're talking about?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good number of hours, because I mean, we
Yeah,
use
but
it.
I'm gonna
quite a
guess
bit,
it probably has fewer hours on it than if this were used at a bigger airport.
Yes,
Go on.
I would agree with that.
You may be only, maybe at half the hours, the same life of a machine used at another place would be.
Right.
You would think they would, something that's gonna be used a lot and has the potential where they'd have some sort of a lubrication system working on that, you know?
Current models do.
They do.
So they
Because of this
realized over time that this was a
Okay.
design flaw, but. Next item is, and I've been talking about this for a while now, but increasingly this is getting publicity in the news as well, is this PFAS. Airports are, kind of the target, ground zero of a lot of the concerns around this, even though it's a chemical widely used in our environment. We are still waiting to hear what the final plan is that the state is going to move forward with with regards to equipping all of the airports that are required by FAA rules to test and dispense this product for calibration purposes. And basically, this equipment will basically not allow the dispensed product to enter the environment. What is the state in the lame duck session has allocated some money. It's not going to cover everything. Probably what's going to happen is that some of the grant requests we have put in under capital improvement, those funds will get used to basically fill in the extra costs to get this product acquired.
It almost sounds like every airport is being forced to buy their own equipment to do this, to test your equipment. It seems like, because it's only a once-a-year type shot, they should have a truck that comes around, and you can hire this truck that does this.
That
or you
question,
or you can share this
at our
equipment
winter
with
conference,
another
that
airport.
question was asked, and I was going to say the exact same thing, but when the question was asked and every airport in the room said, no, we want our own,
Oh,
I was like,
far down.
okay, I'm not going to go there.
But for once-a-year use, it's gonna sit there.
Yes.
And you're gonna have to have retraining every year to understand how to use it again.
Yes, yes.
Oh, well.
Update on land acquisition. So I'm fairly confident, based on what I heard on Friday, that the full reimbursement package will get submitted this week. The last piece of information is we were tracking down an item on the closing statement that supposedly we paid for, but we didn't have a record of paying for it because actually we didn't pay for it at the time. It was basically the property taxes on the property for the winter tax payment. That payment basically comes out after we purchased, but it was close enough that we never received the invoice or the bill for it. So through tracking this down, we finally got that tax bill, the delinquent tax bill, paid like $5 in fine or extra fees. And basically now that was the last piece into that reimbursement package. I'm still waiting to hear from Perry and Newhoff, and honestly, I have not been pushing them on this, and I think that they've lost sight of it on getting a draft or a plan together for the environmental cleanup. But I really wanted them focusing on both our project for this fall as well as the reimbursement package. And just so you are aware, this was mentioned in presentations last summer, but as part of an acquisition like this that's federally funded, the owner is entitled to relocation costs. So that process is still being tied up. So there are future reimbursable under the grant expenses that will be coming through as it relates to final relocation costs.
Would some of those be, what are we talking about there, I guess?
Trucking, taking things to the dump, yeah, I mean, just whatever it costs to move personal property off of the property.
Miscellaneous.
Yeah.
Moving his washing machine.
So, for example, there will be trucking expenses to ship the cattle to auction that he had, as a valid expense, so. Update on our capital improvement plans for the coming year. So, I am always amazed by how the federal government moves. So, this big supplemental airport improvement program for 2019, where priority is given for projects to be done in 2019, they still have not yet announced which projects will be eligible for that funding. For us in a northern climate, not a lot gets done before now, so it's not as critical, but I mean, we are over halfway through the year. But if you were in a southern climate, how do you plan for projects when you don't know often until the last couple of months of the fiscal year whether or not you're going to get money for it? It's sometimes frustrating. We are still moving ahead because our window of opportunity, while it isn't, imminent, it also can't go much beyond where we've scheduled it in mid-September, because we start then approaching, winter or weather, the other end of the season. So this project is planned, went out for bids. 2 bids were received for the project, both Reith Riley and Elmer's, who both attended the pre-bid. Both submitted bids. Reith Riley was the low bid by a significant amount.
Wow, that's quite a difference.
It is quite a difference. And that should be approved as part of the Aeronautics Commission meeting. Their next meeting is May 22nd. That's when the funds would be allocated and the grant agreement created, and once the grant is in place, then a formal acceptance of the bid can be put into place. So that's kind of the windows. Once that funding is allocated, it's probably then too late to utilize any funding that might come out of the supplemental program. So we've got a brief window yet for, and again, from our perspective, the 2 differences is that the supplemental is 100%, whereas our traditional funding is 95%, with a 5% local match. But the other thing is that the funding, if it were to come through the supplemental program, would still then leave us with funds to do our next projects on the list, as opposed to using up all of our allocated funding for this project. So we hope to hear soon on that project. Wildlife survey ongoing. They're here twice a month. They do a daytime observation, a nighttime observation. Last time they were here, we asked them about pigeons.
What'd they say?
Their recommendation is live trapping.
Live trapping,
And then lethal means. So you trap them live so you know what you're getting, and then you kill them, as opposed to other things that could.
We could do a
end up killing
fundraiser out
other
there,
things.
shotguns and out there.
It's harder than you would think.
Yeah.
Back to the 2 bids.
Yes.
the airport either have Karina Newhoff or somebody from MDOT compare the two to make sure they were apples to apples with that big of a difference?
Both and will end up looking at it, yes. So both our consultant as well as the state do that oversight.
And the one bid is probably well, we could squeeze you in, but.
And it's just odd because we did a lot of paving last year and it was the complete opposite.
Really?
Reach Riley was way higher than Elmer's.
When Snyder Road came in cheaper with Elmer's in a couple months.
It's, airport, it's a difficult project, so it's out of the norm. So therefore, I think it really just boils down to who's hungrier for work. And from everything I know, Elmer's has got more than they can do.
And there's not a lot of people in the business anymore, so it's
Right,
very narrow market.
There were two other firms that were approached, one from Grayling or Gaylord, and then the other being Grand Rapids. But you've got a 2-hour hold time from plant to, so they would have had to have built on-site plants to do it, which they didn't even bother because they felt it would push the cost out of being competitive. Yes, then you're left with 2 bidders. And neither of these bidders have actually done this type of work from these plants, so it's a
Who
unique.
oversees this, MDOT?
Hmm?
Does MDOT oversee the work then, or who oversees it?
Prina Newhoff
Oh, Prina.
is that, but this is bid through MDOT's bidding system, so this is a statewide bid as opposed to a local bid. Any other questions on this? TSA lease, so I know that's coming up in old business, but just a little bit of an update here. So again, our current lease expires with TSA the end of this fiscal year. The General Services Administration is tasked with negotiating this. They accepted our counter proposal. Their original proposal was just keep the same rate for another 5 years on top of the 5 years they've had it. Our proposal back to them basically brings them up to the same rate we are charging public charters to lease on a square foot basis in the terminal. And the dollar amount of the increase is from $8,700 to $9,500, so a little bit shy of 10%. And I had sent that contract amendment to you all on Friday for your approval when we get to that point in the agenda. Any questions on it though?
Why wouldn't there be any questions on this one? Because it's all in our favor, really, isn't it?
So it's guaranteed 36 months at this rate, and then, I'm trying to read that this lease.
It is, it's a contract, well, and I had to have a go back and forth with them, because I didn't understand, because the contract expires the end of September, but they're saying effective date is March. So this amendment allows them to later extend the agreement under these terms. So there will actually be another amendment coming that will extend it. This just allows them to at these terms. And the terms basically are, it would extend it for a firm 36 months with another optional 24 months on top of that at this rate.
Okay.
So, this is money we're gonna get, or this is money we have to pay?
This is leased to us for the space they occupy in the
Oh,
building.
okay, okay.
Their rent.
Yes, it's their rent.
Well, when you talk to lease or leasee and so on, unless you keep track of it right now through, you get trying to twist it around a little.
Okay, air service update. So we covered a little bit of this in the passenger numbers, but we were down 19% for March. And I kind of alluded to why, because it was a tough comparable the year prior. However, even though our passengers were down 19%, revenue was actually up 5%, because the average per passenger was up 29%. And again, that's reflecting that drastic pricing that we did a year ago. So it's kind of economics 101, supply and demand curves. Just because you keep lowering the price doesn't mean that you're going to get either more or less revenue. It's the combination of trying to find that magic point where you're extracting the most revenue for the amount of product you're selling. Performance with Ultimate Jet, again, has been good. April right now, we're looking down, and that's in spite of the fact that, unlike March, where there was this odd comparison a year ago, April's pretty much an apples-to-apples comparison. And my best guess right now is probably a 7% downward tick. And this kind of gets into one of the things we're going to be talking about later this week at our marketing meeting is trying to figure out what is the cause of that, and is the current fare situation out of Traverse City really what's driving us in that situation. And kind of, so I've got a little more number digging to do to kind of go back over a period of time and kind of look at the difference between fares between us and Traverse City and see how that translates into employments, and to see if there's any pattern there. Summer schedule, it is open. As of when we met last month, we hadn't yet really announced it. We're now actively marketing it to our existing customer base, the fact that the schedule is open, and that we're also returning to our preferred schedule with a morning departure, evening arrival, as opposed to right now the midday departure and arrival. An update, there's been a lot of back and forth on Traverse City, no Traverse City, 19-seat, mixed with 30-seat, and a variety of options. A lot of that, well, operating into Traverse City, that was ultimately nixed because of decisions that the Traverse City Airport took that really made it not feasible. But regardless of whether that was happening, this operator out of Traverse City called ASI was planning on staffing crews for the 19-seat aircraft, basically to help out Ultimate Jet Charters, to kind of basically allow them to continue what they have planned for the year, as well as to pick up a different aircraft type. Well, it turns out that ASI about a month ago was just sold to new owners. So that kind of pulls the rug out from all of that work that had been gone up to that point. And the new owner isn't responding to any outreach to them. So clearly that's not something either they're interested in, or they're just not at that point where they can think about kind of future projects as opposed to just kind of the nitty-gritty of dealing with the actual acquisition itself. So as of right now, it is unlikely that we will see a 19-seat aircraft option for the summer. This, though, is still the plan for the fall. So after the summer, after the demand for 30 seats kind of evaporates, this would be the plan for the fall. So there's a few months, but the clock will tick quickly for public charters to find out how they're going to actually get this operated.
So will there be less flights out of Traverse City then, with this change in ownership, and will we have more demand?
ASI does not currently they are a charter operator, so they don't, we would have been their really first commercial type operation. And that's one of the things that was appealing to their previous owners, is that was a direction they were looking to take the company. Now under the new owner, that
It's not in play.
probably is not going to be in play. And then on marketing, already touched on the first point. So our $75 connecting fare, there's going to be discussion later this week at our marketing and joint meeting with public charters on if we're gonna move forward with that or not. Because there's no technology component, it's a lot of manual work to do some of this work. They're looking at it as not worth it. I wanna make a case that this is what our community needs from their airport, is the ability to reasonably connect, even if the mechanisms aren't there, at least the price is somewhat appealing. We'll see where we end up going with that. You know, going back to a year ago when we were having the conversations around options for different airline carriers, one of the things this board made very clear is that going forward, interline agreements, major carrier things, that's viewed by this board as being something that is critical for us to move forward. This is kind of like the poor man's version of that, so, you know, I believe that if we can't achieve what we want, we at least need to be able to get as much or as close to that as we can. So, those conversations will be continuing and coming up later this week. Still planning some joint collaborative marketing with both the CVB and the Chamber. Those don't have really definitive projects yet. And as I've already talked about, trying to understand, April being a little bit lackluster, and our advanced bookings for summer, the farther out you get, the harder it is to predict, but there's nothing that's jumping out and saying, yay, go. It's like, eh. And is the Traverse City pricing, to blame for that? It's certainly a factor that is playing into that.
It doesn't help, but I would think our reliability exceeds theirs.
Yes,
by,
yes.
by a margin. Back to the $75 connecting flight price. When I sent that text to you and Brandon, if you could see that option as opposed to having to scroll up,
right. But
it would jump at you more.
yes,
Because not everybody's computer literate, not everybody knows how to navigate through things.
but kind of what I'm implying is the airline wants to bury it even further because they don't want people, because they see it as losing revenue as opposed to providing the service that our community needs. So there's different views on that. So that's part of that conversation. Because if we wanted to, we could probably generate easily enough demand that would take 2 full-time people all their time to just be responding to this. That has not only less revenue because it's a lower price point, but also increased costs. So it's finding that balance, and I've got some ideas that I want to propose to them to kind of try to rein it in, but yet focusing on our community and their needs. So for example, it's not as important for us to be marketing something like this to Traverse City. But with a lot of digital technology or digital marketing, you can really pinpoint. So, my ideas is let's just really market this and focus this just on, maybe a 20-mile radius around Manistee, and not promote it, to keep kind of some of the negative expenses and the revenue impacts out of the picture, but yet still providing that service to our community. Any other questions on anything?
Thank you, Barry. You don't need a motion to accept his report, do we? No. Old business, Coho Bend, board contract.
Doug, refresh my memory, when executive committee, when we met with George, we asked him about this,
Yeah.
and I thought he took an action item out of that, but I don't
He did,
remember what it
because,
was.
the new owner is either working with his partner, the new owner of that resort they were going to have communication, and he was gonna resurface that, or bring that to the surface and say, you know,
Okay.
we've gotta clean this up. I don't know if you're aware of it, but he was gonna make him aware of it.
So,
So-
since you're in contact with George
I'll follow
on
up.
the contracts, if you
Yep.
could just make,
Yep.
remind him to follow up on that.
Okay?
So who is the new owner?
That's about what I remember, what George said too, something like that, it was just a brief
Yeah, very good.
discussion.
Do we know who the owner is of the whole thing?
I do not, no.
No, okay.
I don't know if the deal's finalized.
And that might be that they were going through the process, so it was gonna surface. Airport zoning?
I've not heard back from Rob Carson on that. Need to reach out to him again, although I know he's working on a lot of zoning stuff.
He is, he's very busy.
TSA lease agreement? Do we just need a motion to, anybody wanna make a motion to accept the TSA contract for signatures?
So move.
Second.
Second,
Roll call, or just all in favor?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Mr. Bergstrom?
Yes.
Mr. Dance?
Yes.
Ms. Goodman?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. And then, audit, physical audit?
So we received a little, probably 10 days ago now, the draft audit. So there's a document I need you to sign after this meeting, that's part of the final audit package. And, you know, does this board desire to have a presentation from the auditor this year?
Is it included in the price we paid?
Generally it is, and generally we have had them come, so.
Let's go with that.
I would say yes
Okay.
too.
So then Rachel and I will follow up and get that scheduled for
Sure,
one of our
30
future meetings.
30 minutes.
The only thing I will add is that in the audit, there is is the term finding? There is a finding that looks a little poorly on our part with regards to our PFC funds. So that, as part of the audit, there's actually a separate audit for just the PFC funds. In the fourth quarter, calendar quarter of 17, which would have been the first quarter of this fiscal year that's being audited, there was about $10,000 that of income into that account that I flagged when I first saw it. It's like, this doesn't make sense, just the way we're paid. Rachel hadn't yet taken over that. And, you know, so it didn't really move forward over the course of the year. When the auditors spotted it, they had a conversation with Russ, and he was apparently supposed to get them some information, and apparently either that didn't happen or they weren't. You know, so they're basically saying we need to improve our process as it relates to the PFC.
What's POC stand for?
Passenger facility charge. It's the $4.50 per ticket tax that we collect. So,
Sorry, the outsider here. Who's Russ?
Russ Pomeroy is the
county treasurer.
county treasurer. He was the airport authority treasurer for a number of years until Rachel took over that responsibility. So, just so when you get the documents and you look for, there is one in there that's, yeah, so you know about it. That's all the comments. Do you have anything else to add on the audit?
Were you content with the audit process?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, this firm is getting, each year, they are getting more thorough. And I don't know why, but I mean, it's all good stuff. I mean, they're cleaning things up that should have been like our fixed asset list. I mean, that's something that I never even knew it existed through these audits until like a year ago, and then now it's, you know, very accurately being maintained going forward, so, no, overall good things.
Comments by authority members?
None.
Good to be out.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Fly through.
And fast.
The only thing I'd like to say is, Barry and I, after our discussion about the contracts, morphed into a very broad-based conversation about the truck was broke down at that point in time. And if you guys remember in our meeting, Jeff came in and we were talking to him about a few things regarding that truck. My high-level discussion with Barry was, for the county folks in the room, what could we take advantage of here to save costs that might be in that building down the street? From talent of mechanics, so we're not chasing stuff down, to, is there a way to share equipment?
Talking with the road commissioner?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
with the
my
county,
thought, it's
with-
like, we're talking over, you know, doing a kind of spec thing over the phone, it's like, we have mechanics that deal with large
Large
equipment
equipment.
right down the
and-
road.
You know, if there's ever, and we've got specialty snow removal equipment here, that if ever the county or the city got in a position where they needed assistance and it's able to leave property at a, hey, you help us, we help you, you know, Barry's budgeting to try to, or to put in a grant request for a zero-turn mower to use 3 times a year to go around the runway lights, so that the big gang mower doesn't have to try to do it and damage. So if there's 3 or 4 times a year, now, I'm sure once here, they would find further uses for it, but do we have a zero-turn mower sitting at either the city or the county that sits there for 20 days a month, not being used, that could come down here for use, even if it was a rental fee, but it saves us the expense of purchasing a new one? That was just, it was a very interesting conversation. I don't know where it could go, but
It's a logical thought process. I hearken back to 1978, when the hill was closed during the big blizzard, and everything was here to open it up. In a couple hours, we had equipment that would blow your mind, but it couldn't leave the property. I don't know if that has ever changed or not. Can the equipment leave the property?
I'm not sure if it's federally purchased or something.
There was a snow blower here that would gobble up a building and
I
shut
thought
it
they
down.
finally actually did use it that year.
I don't believe so.
I've seen that happen in Cadillac, where some of those, that blower that's out here is massive. I mean, it could do some.
Real opening.
Well, I think it's a good idea, I mean, to work together.
You can always pose the question.
But,
So I don't know if that's a discussion to get a list of items and have the road commission, the person in charge, come in for a meeting or a sit down with one of our committees or the whole authority to say, how could we, you know,
It would
each
take a
save
little,
some.
it would take a little preemptive discussion.
Okay.
I can probably have that.
Yeah, because reverse what you said with the airport equipment going up could be the case with the road county equipment going out to non.
And we
business stuff.
have contracted with the road commission, I think, whatever the most recent for the snowy winter was, 12, 13, because we're not allowed to have more than 18 inches of snow basically in an area where some of our radio navigation equipment is, so they had to clear out about a 2-acre square area of just everything. It's just not something we could do. We need really a number of vehicles in to do that, so. We have utilized them in the past for that.
I think it's a good idea, but I think probably just checking with the feds, first, just to see what they say. I'd be amazed if they said, yeah, you can use it in other places, but maybe.
That's all I have. Motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Good to see you all again. I'll be in touch with the 2 committees.
Good job putting all this stuff together.
Thank you.